Welcome back to this episode of Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter on WSOU 89.5 radio from Seton Hall. Well, I tell you, we are so happy to have really two of the very important folks who are keeping scholarly industry publishing safe, secure, and precise. Today's conversation goes to the heart of trust. Trust in science, trust in institutions, and trust in our systems we rely on to distinguish fact from fiction. We're living in an era of unprecedented scientific output, more papers, more data, more platforms, more speed, quite frankly, more junk. And yet, paradoxically, trust in scientific record itself is under growing strain. Retractions are rising, incentives are misaligned, volume is often rewarded over verification, and technology, once expected to be the great stabilizer, may in some cases be amplifying the very problems it was meant to solve. Well, my guests today are two of the most credible and pragmatic voices examining this issue head on. Kent Anderson is the founder of the Scholarly Kitchen and is one of the most respected critics and analysts of modern scholarly publishing. His work has consistently challenged the industry to confront uncomfortable truths about incentives, governance, and editorial responsibility. Joy Moore is a senior industry leader with deep experience at the intersection of scholarly publishing platforms, technology, and business models. She brings an operator's perspective to how systems, economics, and scale shape behavior, often in unintended ways. Together, Kent and Joy are the authors of the forthcoming book, How the Internet Disrupted Science, to be published by Globe PQ Prometheus, with distribution by Simon & Schuster. This book will be published in July 2026, so you're getting an early view of what the book is going to be about. The book examines how digital scale, economic pressures, and technological acceleration have reshaped and, in some cases, destabilized the scientific record itself. Today, we're going to talk candidly about what are the many ways that we're now calling a crisis in the scientific record, how we got here, why it matters beyond academia, and what must change if trust in science to be restored. Kent, Joy, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
So let's start with an icebreaker for each of you. In one sentence, what is the most broken right now in the way science is communicated to the world? Joy, ladies first.
I'm going to say the fact that we are even having to ask this question means that the communication around science is broken.
And I'd add, I think that the scientific information space, as you alluded to, has become infected with bad information. And a lot of this is due to the habits that we've assumed out of Silicon Valley. Reliance on attention metrics, quantity over quality, speed over care, pay-to-play business models, and now, most recently, AI slop.
Wow. AI slop. Yes. So, Kent, you've argued that scientific publishing once acted as a circuit breaker, slowing things down, enforcing standards. Can you go deeply into what has changed?
Sure, Darrell, I'd love to. A whole host of things, and we've been observing it gradually over the past 20, 25 years. And it's why we wrote the book. But basically, scientific publication leaders, publishing leaders, editors, and business leaders have allowed a shift in digital distribution to radically redefine their industry sense of purpose. Instead of remaining focused on high quality content for specific communities and taking the time to ensure that the experts in those communities received accurate and relevant information, the industry became focused on scale, which is a Silicon Valley conceit, using a business model, producer pays, with gold open access and other things like that, which is very much akin to the Silicon Valley advertising business model. And it created some of the very particular kinds of fraud and corruption we see in online advertising and in bias on social media and general web platforms in order to drive people to extremes.
Wow. So, Joy, from the platform and business side, how do you incentivize structures, especially open access and other author pay models, that will shape the behavior in a much more productive way?
Well, the publishers with the large platforms understand that individual papers and the data they're able to collect on how people use these papers are monetizable, one click at a time. So, where we used to focus on journals as being the branded products that publishers were focused on, now the papers, the individual articles, are the products, and the journal name is the packaging, and the platform is the brand. And so big publishers can extend their portfolios to accommodate papers of varying degrees of quality or scope to serve the growing market of authors of all stripes who need to satisfy their academic or commercial requirements to publish. And these papers act as currency, regardless of whether the findings and claims are useful to other researchers. And so we're seeing a lot of pop-up publishing that's these platforms can enable, stand up a new journal or do a special issue. And at the same time, we're seeing the smaller publishers that are more focused having to join up with the big platforms in order to simply compete and exist.
So, Ken, at what point did this technology disruption become an economic one?
Yeah, I think it became an economic one when the argument was that needed to be free. People started to assume that the public was an audience for scientific information, and then the only way to make it work was to make it so that authors paid for it. And it was an argument that because the government funded scientific research, that therefore taxpayers needed to get access to the reports of that scientific research for free. And I think if you look at analogs to that, I think you see how that argument doesn't make sense. I subsidize farmers to get good food. I don't want to read their crop reports, right? I pay for my water bill in order to have drinking water and a good system of, sewage system, not that I want to read the reports coming from the wastewater plant. I want those things, but I don't need to read the reports. But there's this conflation of economic and epistemic technological ideas at the same time. Also, the idea that the marginal cost of distributing a scientific finding was near zero with the internet, not taking into account that the fixed costs of running those platforms, of hiring those technologists, of having all the security systems and the analytics systems and everything else were far greater than the variable costs of producing print issues and distributing those once a month or once every couple of weeks. So, a lot of confusion around this, but ultimately it kind of became a philosophical disruption because everybody became confused about what the purpose of scientific publishing was, which again, historically has always been to serve specific communities in specific ways with high quality, relevant information.
Wow. And Joy, in your point of view, do you feel that publishers are trapped by these incentives or they're complicit in them? And is there a realistic alternative to this current commercial model?
That's a good question. Every publisher is different, and I think that's one of the things that Kent and I want to get across is that every publisher has their own community, their own stakeholders that they're serving for um, different specialties, but also different economic reasons. And so one of the things that we like to do is not try to lump everyone together. Um, that said, what they all have in common is that they're making their business decisions based on who they're aiming to serve and what is paying their bills. Um,
It seems like the publishing community, not everyone, but a large part have lost their overarching objective of producing quality scientific research. Kent, you've been at this. I've known you the whole time I've been in this industry since
Same
96.
here. We've been lucky that way.
And you have always been an advocate for good science.
Yeah.
How do we get back to that?
Well, I think, some people have said slow science is better science, and I would agree with that. Other experts have said less science is better science as far as the amount produced and put into the publication streams. I think that, we've kind of lost our way. We allow, all the norms that we've allowed to be broken, right? Peer review, just post your preprints. Doesn't matter. Peer review doesn't matter to us anymore. Conflicts of interest about who's paying for the research and about who's paying to have the research posted. That doesn't matter to us anymore. We're not going to ask you to disclose that. That's recently started to change, which is a good thing. So we're starting to have some disclosure about who's paying gold open access APCs, which is a good thing. We don't really care about what goes into large databases like PubMed Central and things like that. Predatory publishers have been caught in going into there, and they've been indexing preprints. All of these things. I think it's a kind of bringing back a set of standards, but also monitoring incentives. I think that's a huge thing. So if somebody is paying to publish something, why are they doing that? To ask that question, a very fair question. Why did you pay somebody to publish this? Was it not good enough to have them assume all the risk for publishing it and using the quality of your findings and the importance of your findings to further burnish their brand and to attract a higher level of science from that community. So a lot more scrutiny, I think, of these things will help a lot.
And so what prompted the two of you to come together to publish the book, How the Internet Disrupted Science, and what can the reader expect when it is available?
Yeah, so we started talking a little over what has been like 15 months ago.
yeah, just over a year.
Yeah, just over a year ago. And I've been covering this space, as you know, Darrell, since 2007, 2008. And I was very much started to cover it as an enthusiast. I was very enthusiastic about, I've talked about Physician 2.0 and Publisher 2.0, and, I loved the disruption mindset and all of that, but I thought the norms would hold. And the norms didn't hold, and the norms kept getting twisted. And I've kept finding, stories of corruption and stories of insider trading and duplicitousness and deceit that just didn't make sense. And there was also this drive to create a monoculture. So when I reconnected with Joy, we both found ourselves kind of on the same page. It's like, what's gone wrong here? This is not I discovered scientific and scholarly publishing, and it was a breath of fresh air because it was a group of people who were all devoted to sorting out fact from fiction, to refining, helping people with really important findings, refine them and get them out to other scientists so they could use them. You felt like you were building something great. And right now it feels like we're destroying something great, which is the opposite. And so we started to try to find a way to bring this concern to a wider audience. I've been bringing it to the scientific publishing audience pretty, productively for, a long time now, 15, 20 years. And, I write the Geyser and publish that every day and have thousands of people read it, but we want to have hundreds of thousands of people read it. So we tried various things, and then we realized that the best way to do it was to put all our ideas together in a book. And so we explore everything from the historical norms of publishing and how publishers came out very quickly. And then we dive into all of the things that have happened since then, how technology vendors have become kind of the default go-to players in scientific publishing. If you look at any scientific publishing meeting, it's all dominated by technology vendors. It's not dominated by editorial voices. How how copyright came under attack, all of various issues. And kind of wrap it up with a concern about if all these things line up and you look at what's going on with RFK Jr. and the anti-science devotees in the government now, you can see that there's something bigger afoot, and it doesn't seem like scientific publishers are screaming from the balconies about the problems. They seem to be more watching their bottom line and trying to stay out of trouble. So we think that's where we can step in and say, no, you should actually make some good trouble, I think.
Exactly. And Joy, you also, we met some years ago when you were with the blog Seed, I believe.
Hmm.
And you've been at it as well. What are your thoughts in regards to how the industry we can turn this around?
We definitely can, and that's why Kent and I, when we reconnected, we can connect the dots on the technology front, on why do publisher websites work the way they do? Why are they throwing off unintended consequences? How are people making money through the technology? And also the how the outside world is using publisher platforms to take scientific papers and use them for their own means. And so taking that inside out, outside in perspective is where we have laid the through lines. And there are very simple things that could be done to counteract them if publishers wanted to take back control of their content for their core audiences.
Interesting enough, I was at Elsevier and launched Science Direct, and Karen Hunter, she was the senior VP of strategy. She actually came up with the idea for Science Direct for Elsevier, not for the industry, but for Elsevier. And she realized early on that in trying to get other publishers' content, abstracts, and indexes on the Science Direct platform so people could connect, she would have to do a license for each individual one. So the industry came together and created Crossref.
Hmm.
Is this another opportunity for the industry to come together for the better good of the industry to put in standards around publishing?
I think that's one possible tool that could come about. I think that if the industry said that peer review is a non-negotiable and good peer review, not just the hand-waving kind that some publishers do, but really strong peer review. I think if they, standards like, careful evaluation by certifying bodies, you know, were repeated. But I think the big the biggest thing to me is one, and our biggest recommendation is, well, I think copyright is a democratic principle. Copyright is in the Constitution for the U.S. It's in among the natural rights cited by a lot of the Western world for its citizens. And I think that denigrating copyright should be off limits. I think Crossref actually, one of the more interesting anecdotes people might remember was when Omics was a big predatory publisher, and the Federal Trade Commission fined them $55 million because of their consistent predatory publishing practices in order to help drive them out of business. Crossref took them out of their membership and said, Omics, you're not going to be able to use Crossref anymore. Crossref is an interesting example because they have a pivotal role in this, right? They are the de facto scholarly scientific publisher registry. And if they had standards that were higher and said, if somebody's paying to place that article, there's a financial incentive that we don't like. If this group has this many retractions, or they're closing down a brand or something like that, there are signals that they could use to evaluate whether those DOIs should be granted in the first place, whether they have the kind of qualifications and community focus and community uptake and all of that in order to justify getting a Crossref DOI. So I think there are bodies like that that could do a lot more with their place in the technological realm than just dish technology.
And I think that's a really good example of the premise for our book, the unintended consequences. You started with something that looked like technology, and it turned into a certification that turned into a business model that could be exploited in one direction or the other. And so our recommendation is for the leaders in scholarly publishing to take a step back and look at how these things are connected, and to re-examine some policies, especially the ones who are in control of making decisions about who gets a DOI and things like that.
This discussion reminds me of the former uh, organization, AAP, PSP.
Hmm.
It still exists, but they disbanded the
Hmm.
group, how the publishers would sit around the table and discuss these very significant issues. At the recent annual STM Frankfurt conference, they actually had the different publishing organizations on the dais together discussing something for the first time. Why is it that the leaders of our various publisher organizations have not come together to say, let's tackle the industry's serious problems? Ken, what are your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts, one of the things that the presence of technology and the pursuit of scale led to was a massive consolidation of the industry.
Mhm.
Right. So where there used to be, and Joy and I remember these days, the Highwire Press or, some of the other publisher meetings, PSP is another example. There used to be dozens or hundreds of publishers and a lot of people with the title executive or C-level titles in their name. And people would turn to them and listen to them. Now we have at these meetings maybe a dozen people like that. And so there are fewer minds, and there a lot of the contracting, contractual relationships make it so that those 12 people have huge influence on what's possible, or and can be blockers to change. And so you have this concentrated brain power that is more and more commercially oriented and less scientifically oriented, because a lot of those people actually don't seem to have a lot of background in scientific publishing either. So I think from a leadership standpoint, we've seen a change in leaders where they've been tagged to lead these organizations either because they have technology chops,
Mhm.
because they believe in the routines of scale and speed, and they don't seem to have a lot of experience dealing with scientific publishing and the editorial and ethical aspects of that. So I think it's important to have people who understand the job. And, I think that's kind of a crucial missing piece right now on the leadership front.
Mhm. Joy, your thoughts?
A lot of these, especially the largest publishers, have rebranded themselves in recent years as being more about being data brokers or knowledge content providers than actual publishers. And I think to what Kent was just saying, that's part and parcel of how they're operating and focusing more on scale and moving content through the system as opposed to traditional publishing, which has been about what not to publish, right? Right now, it's about more is more, where it used to be about curation and more is less. And so I think that's why we don't really get them at the table talking about publishing, core publishing decisions, because that would curtail the growth that operating platforms, brokering and data at scale require.
In our last 5 minute section that we have, time just flies by.
It
Um,
does.
what is it that you hope that the reader will come away with from reading your book, How the Internet Disrupted Science? What is it, two or three things that you hope it strikes a chord with them?
Yeah, I think that it's, I hope people understand how high the stakes are in all of this. That this is an area, maybe an area they didn't even think about, right? Scientific publishing. They take it for granted. We hear it all the time with Scott Galloway and other academics saying, well, it was peer-reviewed science and it's good. And we want to kind of make people aware that that doesn't mean anymore what you think it means, that people are abusing that term and getting away with it, that there are reasons for that. There are things that happened that really weakened what that means and diluted the power of the industry. And that the stakes are high because where this could lead is, we've already seen the very first inklings of this, right? Where you have a lawyer at the head of Health and Human Services in the US making vaccine policy that has led to one, if not two, maybe three countries losing their measles-free label, to deaths and quarantines and the resurgence of whooping cough and all of this. And they've used scientific information planted specifically to fake justify, or what we call gaslight science, using gaslight science in order to drive policy changes and fool the public. And if there's not a good scientific information space that people can trust and that scientists are protecting, then that kind of thing can happen. So we want people to be aware that this exists, it's important, and the stakes are high if it goes wrong.
And we also want to connect the dots between some ideologies that have been put out there that no longer hold up. And speaking of science, we want to use a scientific brain to look back on how do we get from there to here. And so one of the most fundamental issues is that the idea that more science available to more people immediately is better. And what we found, and through the research and what we discuss in the book, is that it's actually not. And it's better to control copyright and to curate content for the people who need it in a controlled way. And that's what we want to get back to.
Right. And what controlled means is community-based, right?
Mhm.
Each community can decide what that means. Like in botany, maybe you have a seed database that you make available to countries that can't afford, to do genomic testing on their seeds or order the right seeds for their environment and for their agriculture. And so maybe that's how you get your information out. But it's a monoculture and a one size fits all and one model fits all doesn't make sense. So we need to return it to communities and then be encouraging of them to have a long-term interest in the content through copyright and a long-term interest and relevance to the community by being selective about what goes to that community and make sure it's the best information, however that community sizes it up.
I know this is a tough one. 30 seconds each. What are your thoughts about AI and how it can help us solve this problem?
I'll take 1 second. It can't.
Ditto.
And
AI is about as anti-science as you can get. And that at scale, there are small inference engines, well controlled, that can work in specific situations, and they have. That's about it. I think what people have gotten wrong is that they think AI is AI. AI is modest technology that does modest things fairly well. And Sam Altman is conning everybody. That's my take.
There's nothing wrong with using machine learning to solve problems, but using the term AI will help us is delaying action on things that we can solve with our regular human brains and normal computers.
Wow. Can enjoy this. This has been awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, their book comes out this July, How the Internet Disrupted Science. Make sure that you get your orders placed. It's published by Globe, Picu, Prometheus, with distribution by Simon and Schuster. Really thank you for your time today, Kent and Joy, and we look forward to having future conversations.
Thanks, Darrell.
Thanks. Thanks so much. This has been fun.
That wraps it up for this week on Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter on WSOU 89.5 FM and can be found on all of your popular podcasts. We want to wish you to have a very good day and a happy holiday season. But remember, leadership, it begins with you.